Hi, everyone. I'm Judy, the YouTube lawyer. Today, our special guest is Dan Markel's mother, Ruth Markel from Canada. And she is going to talk to us a bit more about Dan and his childhood, as well as her role becoming a victim's advocate and advising people about the criminal justice system. She is also the new author of a book called The Unveiling, which you can purchase online at places such as Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. So thank you, Ruth, for being willing to be on the show again.
Thank you. What a delight. First of all, I hope all of you and your viewers had a very nice Thanksgiving, and it's wonderful. And here you are holding up my book. I have to thank you again for being the champion of my book and reading it very early when it first came out. And so I really appreciate all your support.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I found it so riveting that I read it in a matter of days. And, it is very moving. And we thank you for being willing to share so many personal details about your family and your own life in this book.
Thank you.
So based on all of this internet interest in your son's case, I thought it would be good to again reiterate that this is about a real person. He was more than just a murder victim. And sometimes it just kind of gets glossed over where your son is only described as a law professor who was killed in 2014. So I thought it would be nice if we could touch on some more information about your son's childhood and what he was like as a person. And I do recall you mentioning before that Dan was born in Montreal and your family moved to Toronto when he was 5, correct?
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Mm-hmm. And did you speak different languages inside the home?
We basically spoke English. Now, so we're coming from Quebec and Montreal, which is quite bilingual. Both Phil and I worked a lot in French in our work environments. And Shelley went started school in Montreal, and she went to a program which was French Hebrew immersion. She didn't even learn English in school, in other words, proper grammar and so forth, until we moved to Ontario, and she was in grade 3. But Dan's formal sort of introduction to school really began in Ontario. So I would say that his French speaking was really what you would learn as a second language in school at the time.
I see. Well, did he have many opportunities to speak French or practice French?
No, I wouldn't say that much. I think we all had more opportunities in some ways, and to actually speak Hebrew, not in the house, but in terms of what our summer camp relationships were like. We went to Israel frequently, so I would say that, and they both had both Danny and Shelley went to private Hebrew school in English. So the actual, I don't want to call it a second language because it wasn't talked in the home as a second language, but let's just call it a lot of exposure to speaking Hebrew through travel and so forth.
And I also recall you mentioned that he was like Dennis the Menace when he was younger, and he would tear off all the new wallpaper in your house, and he liked to run around playing with mops and ladders. Can you tell us what his personality was like when he got a little bit older?
He actually always had this high energy. I would be very deceitful if I wouldn't tell you that part of him never really stopped. But he loved sports. He was very specific. He played hockey, so we're Canadian, means we do winter sports here, a lot of winter. He played hockey, he skied, and he also played baseball and tennis. And he tended to like certain things a little more specifically or selective. So for instance, when he went to summer camp, he would choose a place or a camp that allowed him, let's say, 5 hours of tennis versus maybe 1 a week. The next summer, he would decide to play baseball. So basically, he liked them. He was determined. And I think that's why his way he played sports was already showing that kind of determination. And the same thing is skating wasn't so perfect initially for hockey, but he actually really, really worked hard. And then he got the most improved improved skating, I don't know, was a certificate or badge or, something like that. And then also he was very keen to be industrious, like from 12 to 15, he always took on extra summer jobs. And that showed a little bit of his personality already. So his first job that he took, he worked as an assistant in a bakery. This is a funny story. But in a bakery, you don't just put stuff in bags. He had to learn how to make pastry boxes, and he couldn't do the tying of the knots. So he came home one day with 3-size boxes. And Phil says to him, "What is this?" He says, I have to practice how to do the proper tying of the box, or they're not going to keep me. And that was kind of really how he really went through many of his other activities, with always that sense of, I'm going to learn it, I'm going to be determined, and so forth. And at the same time, he had so many outside activities. He loved music. He had one regret in his young adolescence, was that he didn't take music. And the reason he didn't take music will go back to being Dennis the Menace. So when he was 9, 10 years old, I had a very good music teacher, and Shelley excelled. And then one day she called me and she says, "Ruth, I can't keep Dan." I said, "Why?" She says, "I'm like a babysitter. If he comes on time, it's okay. But does he do any lessons in between?" Anyway, so that was the end of his piano at the time. And it's funny because it was the only thing. He loved music, and he loved to dance, and he loved to be social. So that was just sort of I would say, the only regret. And he tried it later on in life to maybe pick it up, but it didn't exactly go. So he always participated versus really being skilled at it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like both your kids were very busy with so many different activities and then academics also. So how did you juggle it all then? Did you and your husband have flexible schedules?
No, we were the beginning. So I'm in the 60s now, okay? Shelley's born in 1969, Danny in 1972. I hope she doesn't mind me saying when, but this is the beginning. Women were not working full time yet. But I think, and if you remember in the book, I talked about the fact that my mother had to go back to work. So for me, it was very natural to actually be working. And most of my friends at the time, women got married if they were thinking about getting married at a much younger age. And they also, if they went to undergraduate university, that was kind of where they stopped to be a teacher or whatever choices they made at the time. And I went on for a master's degree, which was already an unusual track at the time. So there was maybe from my whole undergraduate years at McGill University, one woman might have entered into medicine, one in law, and one or two in psychology or social work. And that's where I went. So that was really a beginning of a separation of the track of where the women were mostly at that time. And I did work full time. I did take off like a serious amount of time for each time I gave birth to the children. On another program I mentioned, in the we have today, we have a year off for maternity leave in Canada. And that time, Shelley, there was no formal maternity leave, but you could take off leave. And Danny, the government already paid up to 3 months for maternity leave. So we were a little unusual in the sense that we were the beginning of this dual career family.
Mm-hmm. And so what was your and Phil's philosophy in raising your two children? If you had some sort of understood philosophy.
Our philosophy, actually, I'm going to tell you how it started and how it changed. Our philosophy was exceptionally flexible. So the difference was, and this is interesting, because of my friends, let's just say, who were all stay-at-home moms, though their children had to be in bed at 7 or 7:30, and I'm talking about young children, like not, older. And in our case, it was different because I worked, and Shelley used to nap. Sometimes she would wake up like from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 5 in the afternoon, and nobody stopped her because I was flexible. She wasn't going to go to bed at 7 o'clock. So she already started with an extended sort of evening program, let's call it, like not being in bed right away. And Danny actually tended to have a little more routine to his sleeping habits. And whatever time he would be going to bed, would it be 7 or 7:30? But I was also very flexible, not just in what times they went to bed. We traveled a lot and we took them with us, and so forth. But suddenly in adolescence, and this is the contrast now, very, very easygoing environment. In adolescence, we both became strict, but I actually became stricter. And the issue was cars. Okay, it was not drugs, it was not other things, but it was cars. And so as soon as they were able to drive their cars and get a license and so forth, the world changed in the house. And actually for both of them. So for Danny, what was interesting is he got his license and he went out with Phil and I for a drive. And he did like this, look, Ma, no hands. And no, this is his first time out, just got his license. Anyway, I took the car away from him for 3 months. And all my friends were shocked because at that time, Danny was already like studious. This is like 17, 16, going to Harvard already. They couldn't believe it. And coming from this flexible environment, like we never had rules about cookies before supper or any of those kind of, very normal kind of rules in the household. Suddenly, so he gets disciplined, he accepted it well, and then he had to earn back. Every time he went on a new highway, he had to, kind of get supervised again on that highway. Like, so he didn't get freedom once he earned his opportunity back and so forth. And with Shelley, I had another rule that she didn't like. So my rule with Shelley was really different, which was, if you're driving the car, you have to be home a half an hour earlier. So let's just say they had a curfew of 12:30 and 12 midnight. She had to be home with the car. And she hated this rule. She didn't even understand it. And my rule was, if you're going to be driving the car, the last person, you're coming in much later. Like, in other words, and she didn't like this rule until one day, we didn't have cell phones then. One day she was driving home with a friend and they got lost in Toronto. Toronto's a huge city. And they had to get out of the car and make a phone call from a payphone. Okay, we're really going back now. This is old history. Most of your listeners can't even relate to this, right? Without a cell phone. Anyway, and she had to get out of the car. And then after that, she was quiet. So she realized that, these crazy rules that suddenly, where did they come from in a household that never had really serious rules? So that's the environment really that the kids grew up in.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you did have a lot of extended family that wasn't too far away. Do you have cousins or other relatives?
A lot of family at the time, and still in Montreal, and they were all very close with their cousins, both from Phil's side, from my side, and so forth. And actually in Toronto, we have friends, really more friends. We have family here too, but not the immediate family. My mother and my uncle still lived in Montreal. Phil's parents lived in Montreal. So when we moved, it was early from the point of view of just the regular, where was everybody else at the time?
And what was Dan's relationship like with the relatives that were in Canada?
He was very close. Danny kept all his relationships up with all his cousins. You've heard from other description of him, he was this connector. He never dropped off any family members, and he left like a 5-year-old. And it's not that, he saw them every weekend. He always went back to Montreal, and particularly also in Israel, where he saw all his cousins. We had very big families in Israel.
Yes, and I was going to ask you about that. So what is your relation to Israel? And it sounds like there's a lot of extended family there.
There is. We have a very, very large sort of family in Israel on both sides. We also have a very committed relationship with Israel. The children went almost every summer for the first six years of their life. No, Danny, not first 6 years, like 18 months and up. And Shelley went also. We went for business, and we also had a lot of family ties there. So that was like the kind of summer arrangements for many, many years. I went to Israel when I was very young, and I have very strong positive feelings for it, and Phil did too. And he went and he started a business relationship that we could travel and go to Israel. So Israel's a very center part of the family, very central to the family.
Mm-hmm. And have you been there recently?
Yes, I'm hitting over 25, 30 times in Israel. I was there in 2019, just before COVID.
Oh, okay. That's great that you've been able to visit there so often. And I do recall reading in your book, as well as in Stephen Epstein's book, about how Dan's childhood friend died on a beach in Israel due to a bomb. And he himself almost died in an explosion in Israel when a bus in front of him blew up. So how did you and Phil react when you heard about these things?
Okay, I want to separate the events because they're very different times. Okay, so Danny had a very, I don't want to say loving relationship, but a very close relationship with a young woman. Her name was Marnie Kimmelman. They went to school together, public school and early high school. And he used to get in trouble in public school. It was like a little young romance. I mean, I'm from grade 3. He was 8, 9, 10 years old, but it lasted, they were together for 9 years in the same class or more. And he used to sit in class she was in front of him, and his back was always in front of the teacher because he was always looking. And once I went on the PTA night on the teacher, and I said to the teacher, why is it, if it bothers you, put him somewhere else in the class? Like, she said, I can't, he just runs over there. So he had this really, really close, very, very interesting, but this sort of childhood romance, but a total strong relationship. It's actually in the book, the letter that the eulogy that he gave much later on. And she was in Israel as, I think she was just 16, 17 at the time. And one person was hit by a terrorist situation, and and by a bomb, and she died. And that was his 17-year-old experience. And later he was at Tufts that summer, so he missed the funeral. It was in July of 1990, but they had a very big memorial back in Toronto a little bit later. And he became one of the speakers along with the rabbis and so forth. But what's really important if people who have the book should look at that whole eulogy that he did for her again, because it says everything about him. It talks about his commitment to her. It talks about his commitment to Israel. It talks about his commitment to Jewry. He actually says it was 45 years. Look what happened. There was just the war in Germany and the Holocaust. And he talks about this as a kid. And then he talks about no matter how bad what happened to her, we should not stop visiting Israel. So it's very profound. And after he said it, actually, they had it televised. But all the people there, the guests, the rabbis, they all came over and they said, who is this kid? I mean, it was just so effective. So that was his first trauma, really, in his life, and very significant. Then after what happened, he did go to Israel for a year to study after he finished undergrad Harvard. And there's 2 or 3 things that happened. It was a very significant year. So at the time, Yitzhak Rabin, so this is before his own experience, in 1995, Yitzhak Rabin, who was then the prime minister of Israel, he was assassinated. This happened in 1995, and that was the year Danny was there studying. And he called us right away to tell us, but it was also the first night of Shelley's engagement with Ian, and it was a very big event that we invited all kinds of people. So we said at that point, we'll do a minute of silence, acknowledging, because here's this huge assassination, and everybody in the room, that's all they wanted to really talk about, never mind, celebrating an engagement. So that was the early part of not the early part, it was November 1995. The incident that you're talking about was in 1996, the same year he's away. In 1996, he was not in any way killed in the bus, it was two buses that they had been bombed. The first bus was bombed. He wasn't on that bus, but he called us right away. But his problem was that they saw everything. So his second bus came with him. It was rush hour, going to, he was going to Jerusalem to school, to Hebrew U, and everybody else was going to work. But it was a terrible experience for him because the bus in front had been bombed and he saw all the dismembered parts. And he had this vision of terrible, of blood, of this and that. And he called us just to tell us that he was okay in the middle of the night. But that was very difficult for him because sometimes the memory is worse than, maybe had a bruise, it would be a little, I don't want to say nothing is easier, but it might have been lighter, emotionally lighter. And he was definitely very, very thrown off from that experience.
Did you want him to come home when you heard about that?
It's interesting, so I have another family member where some of the parents do say, come back, come home. And so forth. He was already, older a little bit. I don't think he would have come home. Truthfully, he had finished undergrad Harvard at that point. This was like a year before 2 years when he went back to law school. He was older already. Maybe when he was in the 14, 15-year-old age range, he might have come home, right? A lot of parents do say come back and so forth. We discussed it, but we supported him while he was there, and I think we even visited in that year as well.
And so you mentioned that he went off to Harvard, then he studied in Israel, and then didn't he go to England too to get a master's?
So after Israel, he went to Cambridge, England, and he got a master's degree there, and then went back to Harvard Law School. He would have studied his whole life. I mean, this is a funny story. Now we're going back to law school at Harvard, so he's in really his mid-20s or whatever. And one day we were just talking, and then he shows me this man that's just a bit further down the street. He says, "You see, Ma, he's 40 years old, and he's still here." So I said, "Danny," I said, "you're going to be close to 30 when you finish. I think it's time." So he would have stayed forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he seemed to have loved academia.
And he's a
true scholar.
He loved academia, but he also loved Harvard.
And how did you and Phil feel when he said he wanted to go to all these places? Were you 100% behind him, or did you feel a little sad that he was leaving Canada?
We were 100% behind him. We'll separate the sad part, but the 100%, he started when he was young. So it's his sort of transitions are interesting. There's no internet now, remember this. He gets serious in school about 12 years old, in general, I'm talking about. And he performed after 10 years old. He was a very high performer, but he was he was never really serious because he was talented, but he got a little more settled around the 12, 13-year-old age. And then he said he's going to the American University. Now this is 13 years old, and we never discouraged him. So this started to become a very serious quest of his. And that without an internet, without anything, he knew which prep schools. So we lived close at the time, and it's not adjacent to New York, but he knew all the prep schools that kids got to Harvard from, coming through New York. Now I remember in Toronto, in Canada, there wasn't a real route to Harvard because they didn't accept a lot of students. And I'm talking about Harvard. When I say Harvard, I should say really 3 schools. He only applied to 3 schools, which was Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. And then Phil begged him the last year, now it was getting serious, like he's now in grade 12 or whatever, it's the time of applications, says, "Dan, listen, I know you're going to go away when you want to go away, but please put in one Canadian university as a backup plan." And he did. He appeased him and he sort of did it. So we were really used to the idea of this because he started very young. He knew what to do. He positioned himself. He restarted. They had an intake at his high school. He restarted it. He did the debating club. He started a project on something for the environment because he knew that you need leadership skills to get into Harvard besides the marks. So we were very attuned for several years. Not like this was not a a spontaneous discussion in the house that he's going away. It was a little unusual, but my brother had already left Canada to go to the States many years before and never came back. So it was kind of I wouldn't say in the family culture, but it was definitely in the horizon and so forth. Yes, so of course we're sad because I knew at the time that he's like just if like my brother's example is he's really not going to come back to Canada to live permanently and so forth, which is exactly what happened.
And so this is a little odd question, but some people might be wondering, so did you know that Dan had joined J-Date, and did he talk to you much about his dating life?
His dating life, and J-Date's much later. Okay, Danny, you have to remember something. He lived in a lot of cities. Okay, so he leaves Canada first. He goes to Boston, but he has summer jobs in New York. He then goes to Israel, and he worked in Israel, and he lived in Israel, then London, England for Cambridge. So he didn't use J-Date in the earlier years. I'm not even sure when J-Date started, but he definitely dated. And then as he was older, like in his 20s, he had some very continuous relationships for a year. We met most of his girlfriends. We didn't meet his dating friends, let's call it, but any of the women who he went out with for a good year or so, and there were a few, we met all the girlfriends, and he would bring them home and so forth. So it was not a secret. And J-Date, I think really, I think it was maybe he only used it to time in Washington, which is a funny part of the story. And because that's when, as you know, he met Wendi on J-Date.
So that's kind of interesting that it seems like he did bring his ex-girlfriends or previous girlfriends around and introduce them to you and Phil. So you kind of knew what was going on with him personally.
All the time. Danny was this very open person about everything. So we met them. Sometimes we traveled. One of his first girlfriends, actually, I think when his first serious girlfriend, he met in Israel, and we met her that summer. And then after that, later on, he met other women in whether Boston or outside of Boston, just over the years. Yeah, we did. He would always bring them home. And if somebody in the family, mostly in Montreal, if there was a wedding or an event, and he always had it. He always had a date if he wanted to bring somebody, and so forth.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how you say he was very open and liked to talk and everything, because I'm remembering that funny quote you just said on Surviving the Survivor about when he was little, he could sit in somebody's lap and tell you all about the person's bank accounts because he was so good at talking.
Yeah, he was there. He was not a closed book, and I'll give you an example. When they were teenagers, Shelley was more, Danny was street smart, but she was more specific, I'll call it. Here's a good example in the older life you were asking. One time they were just about to start to drive. Again, I'm going back to the car, and Danny and Shelley had been with one of my friend's kids and got a lift home from somewhere. And he almost had a car accident, the other person. And then Danny started to tell us the story. And Shelley was ready to throw the soup at him, like, shut your mouth, because and then he didn't stop. So she says to him, Danny, finally, that's not something you tell your parents. Car accident there was, or whatever. So that was Danny, It's just so funny, the contrast.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like he was a very honest, straightforward type of person.
Yeah, he was open. He was, it was, he didn't have any reason to have these sort of secrets or modify the story. That's a better way of saying it.
Mm-hmm. I see. And this is the part I always hate about the interviews, is that then we have to pivot and then talk about your son's death and everything. But we did also want to touch on the theme of, what it's like to be a victim of a violent crime and the justice system, especially since that's a big topic of your book also. So there are some kind of, like, I guess, more slightly invasive questions that I think a lot of the commenters or viewers want to know, which is, you know, how well did you know, say, Charlie Adelson, for example, after Dan and Wendi got married?
Charlie Adelson, after they got married, I don't believe I saw him after they got married. I think I saw him once or twice at a family dinner, but I don't think after they got married, at the wedding and so forth, because they went to Tallahassee, and to my knowledge, I don't really know if this is factual or not, I don't think Charlie ever really went up to Tallahassee.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, I seem to remember, I wonder if it was during Wendi's deposition or something. Let me know if you don't want to answer this and I can edit it out. But it seemed as if there had been some big argument between Dan and Charlie sometime after Wendi and Dan got married, like some big argument, maybe after the first grandchild was born. Do you know anything about that?
Oh, I don't know. What was in her deposition?
Yeah, I think one of the attorneys might have asked her that during her deposition in regards to Katie Magbanua's criminal case. But I'd probably have to go back and look at one of my old videos.
You find it, let me know. I'm not aware of any big argument or anything between them, and especially after a child was born.
Mm-hmm. I see. Okay. Yeah. So I wonder why that question was asked. I have no idea. Maybe it was just a rumor. So, okay. And then in regards to your advocacy for victims of violent crime, can you tell us a little bit about what your experience has been like with the criminal justice system?
Sure. I'm going to talk about, there's two parts to the experience of the victim. And one is, and I'm starting to really build on explaining this more and more, because I think people have a misunderstanding of the difference between the victim issues and the survivor issues. One is psychological and one is actually more legal. So let me explain. After a trauma from a homicide, so we're called homicide survivors. Homicide survivors is a psychological term, and it deals with sudden violent death. There's no preparation, and the whole course of the journey on grief afterwards is different than other loss, okay? And the reason it's different, A, because of its suddenness, B, there tends to be, the psychological impact is different, so the grief, there's a little bit less crying. They have a lot of information today. It's so sad because of the school shootings, but the whole follow through of what can be expected of how this trauma unfolds is quite different. So the homicide survivor is unique in the sense of it's so sudden. The other, and it's so permanent and so final. So those are the kind of factors. Now the criminal system, let's talk about what the victim, okay, you've all heard the word victim. They're not quite interchangeable as people sometimes think. So the survivor is one aspect, the psychological. The victim is actually a legal term because it's protected in the law. There's victims' rights. There's Marcy's law now, which is a very famous law that was started in California after, this is a very sad story, the Nicholas family, her name was Marcy Nicholas, her boyfriend murdered her, and I believe even her mother had a heart attack at the funeral, and at the courts, sorry, not the funeral, the trial. But her brother started to really decide and did an amazing amount of work. I forgot which company he was with. Anybody can look it up later. Nicholas from something in Silicon Valley. And he started this Marcy's Law to actually respect his sister. And the law has about 16 factors of how victims should be treated. And Florida, just in 2019, actually, just before Garcia's trial and Magbanua's, when they were joined, Florida actually passed Marcy's Law as some of the victims' rights for Florida. Now, how this is distinctive from the homicide survivor is that these are actually respected protections, let's call it, for the victim, and it's in the criminal system. Now, what's the real problem for somebody like us, and this is why I'm talking about it now, the victim experience that we go through now, it's the interaction between the homicide survivor, which is a psychological, and that's why I spent time on the grief issues, and the criminal system. And the criminal system has some very unpleasant experiences, like right now. This is my book talks about it, waiting and uncertainty. Here we are, December 2nd, supposed to have now, right now, this new hearing, right? The case management on Charlie Adelson's trial dates, right? We know, we just learned, I think you know this, your viewers might not. It's now continued to December 16th, right? So here we are, yes, family, all ready to decide what are we doing in 2023. If Shelley has to teach a course, if I want to go somewhere, if I want to do something with the book or whatever, or Phil, we're now up in limbo again. It's like these 2 weeks are dramatic because what does it mean from a victim point of view? You don't know where you are going in 2023. If you live elsewhere and you're working like everybody else, you have a job, you go to work. We have no life until we know what the trial dates. The specifics of the dates are going to be. So that's just to show you how it is. And we've done this now, it's years, it's 8 years of this uncertainty and waiting. And that's what our life is. On the negative side, it's all this uncertainty and waiting.
That's right. And you've already been through 2 trials, and it seems like both of those trials got rescheduled over and over again, and then COVID happened. So that must have been really stressful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And is there someone within the law enforcement or prosecutor's office who serves as a liaison with you and the rest of the family?
Yes, there is formal and informal. I'll go back to first the TBD, like at the very beginning. So Craig Isom, the lead investigator, who was at the trials and so forth, his first job with us after we met him in Tallahassee, when we first came down right after the murder. So the first year was a little difficult because they didn't have that much really to detail with us. And in his office also was a victim support person. Her name was Sarah Latour. So she handled the family initially. The first year was probably the toughest because they didn't have real news for us. But soon after that, after the first year, if anyone remembers, the police had an announcement that they found the car. And then from that time on, the communications through Craig Isom really increased with the family, and we had more sort of notes on what the progress was. So that was the first strong relationship. A little bit at the time with the FBI with Pat Sanford, but less at that moment. And then as soon as the arrest happened, in fact, Craig was the one sort of transitioning us to now we have to start working with the state attorney's office. And that was a big change. But in the state attorney's office, there also is a liaison person. Her name is Helene Potluck, and she works with the families. And so we have this formal, relationship as a result of the structure of, the state attorney's office and as well later on with the appeals. We have a lot of, people who communicate with us, some in a very formal way and some in an informal way. And there can be communications, and many times if we feel we need more, we ask for a call or a meeting or something like that.
So would you say there was kind of an open line of communication where you could feel comfortable calling someone or sending an email to know what's going on?
Definitely sending an email. They don't have to answer. We can ask, right? It's scheduled to the extent of, when it gets close to a hearing or a trial. But access to say, can we contact them? Can we get somebody to ask the question if we can have a call? That's not a difficulty. Can we get the timing of what we're looking for? In other words, they don't always give us all the evidence. They do give us a lot of information. And sometimes it's pre what the public will know. Many times it might be, and so forth. But it's an easy enough way to say we could access and find out if they would take a call. That's the best way of saying it.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of leads into the other question about, so are you therefore given access to all the information pertinent to the investigation or prosecution, or at least the publicly accessible things?
The publicly accessible for sure. The other is some preliminary information is shared with us, but whatever's publicly accessible, you know, we discuss and we have questions, and we have a lot of questions. So, and that's when we do get some understanding of, you know, kind of, well, what does it mean? What is your timing? Are you going to do this? Like they are open to anything that's public. We can have a full conversation about. Anything that's not public, sometimes they'll hold it close to their chest, as the expression goes. And sometimes we'll get a bite-sized idea of what could be happening.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I just remembered, don't you have private attorneys also that can help explain the process to you or kind of serve as a liaison?
We have very, very nice support from Gibson and Dunn in New York. They do a remarkable job. If we need explanation, if we need, you know, preparation, we're very fortunate. There's still a lot of things that we don't understand, and I don't mean from them, that we sometimes need quality information from the prosecutor's office. So that doesn't help us in the sense of whether they're going to give us the information. And occasionally, like they are on a call you know, quite often, and they'll sort of in their own way know what the next question should be. Now, Shelley's also an attorney. So Shelley, you know, can sometimes, you know, have a point of view or pull the right string to get a little more information, you know, in terms of sort of how are you going to handle this? What are you thinking about? Are there options here or there? You know, that kind of stuff. And I myself am quite strategic in terms of what I need to know and how to answer it. So we do get, with our questions now I'm talking about, as much as they can share with us, they're very forthcoming.
Mm-hmm. That's good to hear. And what about the expenses of attending the hearings and the trials? Is there any sort of financial assistance for people's travel costs and accommodations?
There's different times. The first experience, let's say, with expenses comes out of, I think it's a formal thing from Florida law under for victims. So there's some funeral costs, expenses. We filled out these forms at the very, very beginning. There was our first encounter actually with the victim support person. And that I think is like a very, how do I say it, specific to Florida dealing with victims. You know, so I don't know if it's a piece of legislation or it's a practice or whatever happens. So that was really the first and very specific experience. It's a limited amount, but it's an approach, right? That it acknowledges that the family has gone through something, you know, exceptionally difficult. And at later periods of time, sometimes there have been some grant money available for some travel. It's an allocation, like what you would call a stipend, right? It's not an open-ended thing, and so forth. It's not. We have a lot of expenses. There's no question about it. And on occasion, there's like ways in which, you know, some special grant might come up, and Helene Potluck will try to get us a little piece of some money or something. But it's like an honorarium type.
Mm-hmm. And when you've had to go to Tallahassee, did any of Dan's old friends or colleagues help you out too?
Oh, all the time. We are definitely I have so much gratitude to all the people who we have a whole community who supports us. The Tallahassee friends, the synagogue friends. We were there for all the high holidays. 2019, it overlapped with Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. We went to the synagogue where Danny went, and we went to the private homes. So that's been exceptional. As you know, somebody like Jason Solomon started Justice for Dan. So we have that whole social media group. If I ever need any questions, I have had on times, I'll call up some of his friends who have an expertise in an area. Now I'm talking legal, I'm not talking personal, although they would have to be personal too. But, you know, and all kinds of support. And then his friends did a lot of stuff at Harvard, at Lowell House. They started an honorariate program there. We also had a big program that we initiated this one, but they all came from all over at Harvard Hillel, like before the arrests. So his friends, this community is great. We are lucky. We're lucky with the media, and we're really lucky with the friends and all the support.
That's great to hear. And so it sounds like sometime in 2016, then your ability to see your grandchildren, Dan and Wendy's children, was impeded. So what was it like when you saw Wendi in the courthouse at the trials in 2019, as well as earlier this year?
We had no contact at that time. Her lawyers, you know, kind of ushered her in. And she left, and now, even just now, in 2022, it was pretty similar, although we had seen her 2 months before. So at the trial, it's you know, she's a witness. So we're not supposed to even tamper. If you really want to play, you know, criminal law for a second, we're not supposed to have communication with the witness, especially in the courtroom. So there is no contact.
Okay, yes, thank you for being willing to share that. And so what advice would you have for other people who are also victims or homicide survivors involved in criminal proceedings?
I have a lot of thoughts that I would certainly share. And, you know, one of them is don't isolate yourself. When Danny was first murdered, I'm talking the really beginning, a friend who I knew for a while, not my closest friend, but her son had just committed suicide. And I said to her, I said, do you have any advice? Because it was the beginning of me facing this loss. And she says, yes. She says, take every call you get. This is like now, I'm talking about the first month. Don't ever not take the phone call of people calling you nicely to support you. Even if you are not up to it, you know, or you're tired, you know, make sure you call back. And that was really it's a very simple piece of advice, actually, but it's very profound, because what that did, and I was fortunate, and I didn't have to, you know, my other friends would say, oh my God, I'd never get out of bed if I had to deal with what you're dealing with. That wasn't the case for me. I could get out of bed. I'm not saying I was in great shape, but I could get out of bed from the trauma. But the point is really a tendency possibly to isolate yourself and not to be willing to, you know, engage in any social relationships, even if they're difficult. And so that, I think, is a critical finding. Take on, and it goes to the second point, which is possibly more important, take all the support you're going to get. In other words, one is not to be isolated, but the other is listen to the whole range of information. It could be clergy. There's a lot of people play a lot of role here. It's a very big support group. There's clergy, there's therapists, there's other people who have been through difficult, you know, situations. And then you have to have, you know, what I call self-talk. So I don't know, I'm going back to my other career, but, you know, about 80% of our self-talk is negative. And you have to listen and edit your own, and you have a lot of bad self-talk when you're traumatized. You know, I can't do this. I don't think I'll be able to make it through. There could be self-doubt. And to start to listen to the scripts that you're telling yourself. You know, I need help. Help is okay. Help, any kind of help is great, but I'm not going to make it is the reverse of that. And those are the things that you have to really pay attention, because they will affect you, and you will traumatize yourself if you don't, you know, kind of let those thoughts leave and think about other things, about how can I do it? How will I recover? what can I do with the disappointments I'm feeling? And also, I think it's very important to redefine yourself. If you can find something that's meaningful, this is what they're showing today, that makes the big change. And I had the benefit, with the grandparent legislation, which is an important part of my own, I would call it, I don't want to call it recovery in that sense of it, but certainly the accomplishment of completing something like that is very, very satisfying. And I'm happy I did it. And that was a lot of meaning. And I didn't do it alone. I had a full community of support. But the idea that, kind of you complete a big agenda.
Yes, that's really amazing that as a Canadian, you were able to help affect Florida law with the help of Karen Cyphers and other people who were.
And she was phenomenal, and she had we have a whole team. Danny's friend Jeremy Cohn and Jason Solomon, and then there was lobbyists. This is a community. It takes a village. I think that was Hillary Clinton's statement. It takes a village. It takes a village.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I was just wondering, after people started hearing who you were, that you're Dan Markel's mother, and then you just recently published your book, have you been inundated with social media messages or emails, people wanting to tell you their story or ask for advice or give you advice?
Yes, but there's some very serious stuff that I have to tell you about. That was a fluke that I actually saw it, because if it doesn't come in my Facebook or Facebook Messenger directly, I might not see it. But I have a lot of Facebook requests, and they're very serious requests. There's quite a few families, and it's sad actually, that have had murdered. Like a sister-in-law wrote me, her sister that was murdered, and the husband won't let them see the children, and what can they do? A lot of stuff now about grandparent alienation. So that's been very, very important. And I answer with as much specifics as I can do. And that's one of the reasons I believe I send it to you now. We even have a way of how to start the Markel Act. Karen Cyphers just wrote that with Diane Cohn, who's a lawyer. So that's available now too. And I want to say that, which is, what are the steps to be able to get to use the Markel Act in very restricted circumstances when there's a civil or a criminal finding. And that's just been prepared. And if anybody needs it, I believe I sent it to you, right, Judy? Did I send it to you yesterday?
Yes, thank you.
And you could share that. And it's a public document in the sense that please share it. We also did a program on Surviving the Survivor, where I had JAFCO come in. So this is for grandparents looking for help where it's not a criminal case yet, but how can they get help? How can they get a crisis situation? And there's all kinds of people contacting me. Yes, and some of them are support. Some of them will say, look, my sister, this happened to her, and we pray for you. Get a lot of this, as you see the comments, like on your comments and a lot of the YouTube channels, which we appreciate totally. There is a lot of support.
Yes. And actually, one of the commenters wanted to let you know that she bought a copy of your book for Cheryl Williams. But it sounds like you have been in touch with Cheryl Williams, right? And that's Mike Williams's mother, who's in Florida. Mike was also the victim of a murder.
Right. That's so nice, because somebody told me a while ago, I think 2 weeks ago, that she was reading it. I have to call her, actually. So she's an amazing woman. Yes, there's, unfortunately, there's a few of us who've had a few, hard shots taken at us. And I had, as you know, in the book, I had a murder coach. Somebody reached out to me and supported me. So I'm as willing to help other people as far as I can help them in whatever concerns they have.
Yes, that's great that you've been able to get in touch with other people and other parents in similar circumstances. Well, getting back to the Markel Act and your own individual circumstance, trying to see your grandchildren, I wanted to ask you, has there been any more contact with your grandchildren since you had a Zoom with them over the summer?
No, we had not yet. We had 2 Zooms. So Benjamin, the older one, his actual bar mitzvah was in June, of which we were disinvited. We had originally been invited, but we were disinvited. But we did call him to congratulate him. And then his birthday, his real birthday, was July 31st. So we spoke to him. The younger son of Dan's, Lincoln, his birthday was October 13th. So we did have a Zoom. And then when I say we had a Zoom, it means Shelley's family. Like, it's not just Phil and I, the whole family, which is very important because I want them all to have the familiarity, of seeing each other's faces and getting to know them. So that was another opportunity. And hopefully I'm planning to be in South Florida in December, and maybe I'll have a visit. So we'll have something to talk about, Judy, at the next program. Hopefully, keep your fingers crossed.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be wonderful. So do your grandchildren, and I'm speaking, of course, about Dan's children as opposed to your daughter's children, but do they have a way to contact you directly? Like, do they know your email or your cell phone number?
I don't believe, Wendi prefers all the communications to go through her. So I don't know that we would provide it. We would love it to have direct contact. But at this point, there is not an opportunity. If they want to write us a thank you note, it's through Wendy's email.
I see. And so the big news, I guess, which everybody has been talking about online, has been Katherine Magbanua's proffer. And we still don't know any details about that so far. But how did you feel when you even heard the news that Katie was planning on making a proffer with the state and maybe becoming a state's witness?
I think I want to tell you something, and not to put any discredit on anybody. I don't know that's really, how do I say it? I think there's an exploration of that. I'm the most optimistic person. The other day, Phil says to me, I'm so hopeful. And I said, I'm playing neutral. So I'm going to give you the neutral version right now, which is the wait and see, which is unusual for me. But I think that it's probably an exploration at this point. And there's so much speculation and so much hype and so forth. And my interpretation of some of the situation is that to interview Katie in a jail where she was is very restrictive. If there's an opportunity for them to really have some kind of a communication, they need more facility. And that's one of the reasons that she might be coming to Tallahassee. I'm not blowing anybody's balloons here, but putting a sort of taking out the air. But I think we have to really wait and see. And why I'm being so neutral at the moment is only because anything she's going to provide them is going to really have to be, there has to be evidence supporting it, right? So I'm very excited that everybody's excited. And I'm probably, for maybe one of the first times in my situation, taking a little bit of a neutral approach to it because we don't have facts. There's a lot of speculation. And the circumstances are such that it's a very high bar that she has to pass to actually get the evidence that they need, and the evidence that whatever she provides them has to be confirmed. So I'm sorry if I throw you.
No, that's fine. That makes sense. Yeah. So it's not time to bust out the champagne bottles and start jumping up and down over anything.
Be back again, Judy, when it happens. I'm giving you the opportunity, and we will have. I'm not a big drinker, but I promise you, I'll take a drink to the outcome that potentially could come. Listen, it's exciting, but I have to put the whatever the word is, temper it down a little bit, only because of the fact that it's a very high bar for what she has to be able to actually offer them, and so we'll see. It's a little bit.
That's true. Yes. Did you see the interview on Surviving the Survivor of Dan's friend, who is he a state attorney in Florida? Dave Ehrenberg, I think that was his name.
Yes, I did see part of it. Yes. So are you asking me specifically? I don't know him.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because he basically said the same thing, that, like they would need some corroboration. Katie can't just go in there and start spouting off a bunch of lies or make up a huge story and hope that she can get out of prison early. There's, it's
Right.
not really time to celebrate yet. Yes.
No, I actually didn't. I might have seen part of it, but I didn't see that was his overall tone. Well, thank you for putting me in
Oh,
the same
sure. Or you can go
category.
watch
Yeah,
their awesome
I mean,
interview later
there's
tonight
so
then.
much speculation. I don't have to tell you every show, every this, every that, and so forth. But let it be. That I think that it's great. You can also look at it another way, which is a very positive note, which is if there's a shakeup and other people now are starting to reconsider where their thoughts are, what their approaches are, the lawyers, that's a benefit. Like if just, you create this fluidity now of you don't know who's going to say what, where, and to whom. And to me, that's a benefit.
Yes, definitely. So you've mentioned before that you're a pretty optimistic person. So I'm just wondering, what keeps you going, and what do you do to cheer yourself up and help your own mental well-being?
I do a lot of things. Before COVID, I did even more in terms of distractions are good. So I travel, I went to theater, I have a lot of friends and so forth. I wrote the book during COVID, which was probably the best thing. We really locked down here. And I mean, I was going to write the book anyway. I went to New York. You see, it's very interesting. After Garcia's trial, well, not his trial, after he was convicted, for life, that I think gave me a certain relief system. I mean, Katie's mistrial threw us all off. But the point I'm making is, I think I had a certain point of emphasis, a purpose. Get to the trial. Let's see what's going to happen. And once that, I don't want to call it a barrier, but probably a heavy weight was lifted, that's when I started the grandparent alienation issues. That's when I started to write the book. It turned out it was in COVID, which was the best thing because it was quiet and Canada really locked down early. So that gave me a project, to keep me busy, because I'm a person who will find something big to do if I have to, like sort of work with something, to work with trauma or whatever. So I think that is an important aspect of, how I deal with it. My Canadian grandchildren, they're great. And they're also a very positive sort of opportunity for me. They're very gifted in performance and music and theater. So for instance, 2 weeks ago, I went to the oldest one, Michal, who's in Queen's University. In fourth year, she had a production, a show, and I went there. And then last week, the middle one, he's 19, and he just did a jazz band thing. And next week is the younger one, who's 16. She has a live performance and something in theater. So that really keeps me going, because I'm, living through them and with them, if you see what I'm saying. So it's really very important.
Yeah, that's great that you're living close to your other grandchildren and able to take part in other activities with them.
And that is a gift. And I have a lot of friends, and we have a whole community, and a lot of people are very supportive.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, so it's been over an hour now. Do you have any other parting words that you would like to say to the viewers who are so glued to this case? Everybody is really rallying for you and cheering you on.
We appreciate it. We're all very grateful. We're grateful to all these communities that you've all now generated, and as you know, many of them go from one of your channels to the other, and they know more than me at this point. And follow Webster's, follow this. I get a lot of stuff, by the way, from any of them. I mean, I don't mind if they send it to you. You send it to me. I'm learning outside as well, from besides what we're involved in, and it's a very, very positive experience, and it's good for everybody, and and I think that's a nice part. I also think that people who know people now who are suffering from trauma really extend, like, this is just a personal message. there's so many people, you know, who are suffering right now from school shootings and everything else, and really extend your, you know, your influence, your support, because people really need it. And I'm blessed that we have that support.
Okay, great. Well, I hope we hear some big news in the case within the next few weeks then, and then maybe we'll need to have you on again. So
All right.
thank you.
I'll drink in public if there's
Yeah,
really
thank you so much for your time and your willingness to go all over the place on different media networks, you know, sharing your story, talking about Dan. Sounds like you're pretty busy over there. So we'll go ahead and say goodbye to the viewers. And again, the book is called The Unveiling by Ruth Markel, A Murderer's Reflection on Murder, Grief, and Trial Life. So please get your copy if you haven't already gotten it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ruth.
Happy holidays. We didn't talk about the holidays.
Sure.
Happy holidays.
Yes, that's right.
Everybody. Wonderful.
Okay, well, have a great holiday season also. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
We good?